Hi there, I'm Marc Buckley, an ecological economist, regenerative futurist, and solar punk, with a passion for exploring the infinite possibilities of generative AI. Back on June 20th, 2022, a major incident occurred. Blake Lamond, a top-tier executive at Google, announced that their creation, Lambda AI, had become sentient. This claim had been hinted at before, but this time it was firm. The outcome? A storm of debate and ultimately his departure from Google. What's truly intriguing here isn't the discussion about AI sentience, but why a person would risk everything, livelihood, income, even health insurance, for the progression of technology. It's important to remember that other forms of sentience have been recognized in the natural world, in bees, animals, plants, fungi, throughout scientific history, long before humans even appeared on Earth. However, the debate around AI seems to overshadow our precious biodiversity. The real question I'd like to ask you is, what does a world that works for everyone look like to you? This question has been circulating for over 70 years, and it's the one we need to tackle today. Now let's welcome the real Marc Buckley to continue this enlightening conversation with you.
So, I don't know if you know, but artificial intelligence, there's an interesting thing. So when John F. Kennedy was in Berlin, he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I'm going to say in Ludwigsburg, "Ich bin ein Schwäbikaner." So it's good to be here. I want you to know that that video right there was done in about 3 hours or less with artificial intelligence through generative AI. About a year ago, there's a company called Soul Machines out of New Zealand that wanted to charge $500,000 to do a video like that using artificial intelligence and a digital twin. I'm telling you this because we've come a long way and we're moving fast into the exponential future of technology and innovations. The other reason I show this image of the SDGs around the earth is because we're going to talk about models of the future and where we're really trying to go and what we're trying to do. There are some thoughts with the question about AI going sentient. The true question is really, have we domesticated technology or has technology domesticated us? And so we need to think, how can we use technology, innovation, emerging technologies to better the world? And the true question is, what does a world that works for everyone look like for you? And why is that question that we've been asking ourselves for 70 years at the United Nations, at the World Economic Forum, at the World Trade Organization, as well as many other international organizations, to try to move us on the right side of history. Today, this isn't a guessing game or a quiz. I'm going to guide you through a lot of the answers and try to give you some stimulation so that you understand how we got to this point in our world today. This is R. Buckminster Fuller. He wrote many books, but he was an architect, a polymath, a Renaissance man. And in 1969, he wrote this book, The Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And on the inside cover of that book, he actually answered the question, what does a world that works for everyone look like for him? And he did this about 70 years ago, before the actual book, and you see this geodescent dome on the bottom of the screen there. He actually played what was called the World Game at the World's Fair in Montreal, Canada in 1967 with that game, asking people this question and bringing people from all over the world together to kind of work through that question. And it was done in the United Nations, it was done at the World's Fair, all over. I want to read you his answer. To make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without the ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. For any of you who know Simon Sinek or John P. Strzelecki's Purpose for Existing or the Why, can you believe this? Our Buckminster Fuller, 70 years ago, already had his why, and his why wasn't just for himself. It was for the entire planet. I want you to resonate with that, and I want you to think about, what is the answer for you? What does a world that works for everyone look like for you? So I've done a social experiment for the last 6-7 years, and I've asked over 3,500 people this exact question on video. And I want to kind of tickle you and tell you what the results were. So all of the people that I asked, I recorded on video, and out of all 3,500+ people that I asked that question, only seven had a similar answer, but not exactly the same. The rest, I almost had to worry because I thought they were going to have a grand mal seizure. I thought they were on fire because I could almost see the smoke coming out of their ears, because most of them had to think about the answer to that question on the spot. And if I asked them twice in the same day, every time their answer was different. If I recorded it over multiple days and asked them that question, every time it was different. So then I asked ChatGPT. And if you have ever used ChatGPT, at the bottom there's a little refresh button. I hit that refresh button about 120 times, and every time it was the same answer. What does that say, similar to the thought experiment that we started this session in, that AI knows, but we don't know? I want you to think about that as you think about the question, what it means for you, because it's really important. I don't want you to give me the answer that you think your parents, your mother, your father, your church, your city government, your president, or your religious leader thinks is the answer to that question. I only want to know your answer to that question. And the reason why it's important is because if you don't know, that's okay. It's not a problem. But then you have to be okay with the company you work for, the government you live in, the country you live in, the city you live in, because I promise you, if you don't know the answer to that question, someone else has jumped into that spot and is guiding you on the future of what they think a world that works for everyone looks like for you. But if you do know the answer to that question, guess what? You can do something about it. You can divest your money, you can change your work, you can actually have input to make sure that you go in the path that you want to go. So the United Nations has been doing climate conferences and sustainable development for about 51 years now. Last year they had Stockholm Plus 50. That image before was the first sustainable development conference that we had in the world in Stockholm, talking about sustainability, talking specifically about sustainable development. So before this decade is out, 7 years left to go to reach the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's another thing that we kind of have on our list of things to do. And as I look around MHP, I hear through Ralph and many others, the grand vision MHP has, and I applaud you for taking that direction because it's so vital to reach those, because it's a better model for life. But I want you to kind of understand the process. So Ralph and I were at the World Economic Forum this year in January, February, in that time in Davos, and we released this book with PricewaterhouseCoopers and Future IO Institute before this decade is out. That's 7 years before December 2030 to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. But that little message is a meme, what John F. Kennedy said when he stood in front of Congress in the United States and asked for millions of dollars to put men on the moon. We're at that same point in time in our world that we have to reach the Sustainable Development Goals and keep our planet at 1.5 degrees of warming. This is Kim Pullman. She wrote a beautiful book called The Imaginal Cells, and it has many wonderful co-authors in there who have contributed different words. And she did a video, and I want you to kind of watch this video now because it talks about the transition and the transformation that humanity is in at this point in time in our world.
Around the world, people are waking up. They know we need change, and not just at the edges. We need to change our systems, not just our straws. But the question remains, how does change happen? In the face of these mounting crises, it can feel hopeless, but it shouldn't. Because there is a blueprint for change, buried deep in nature. It's a story of transformation, encoded at the deepest level of being, the imaginal cell. A cell that contains within it a vision of something new, of something better. The caterpillar, while alive, consumes. But this cannot go on forever. Everything has an end. Everything has a tipping point. All that is left is decay. But from this place of darkness, something new can be born. At first, the caterpillar fights this new presence.
What we want is more learning in schools and less activism.
Seeing it as a threat, clinging to its old form. But the imaginal cells persist in spite of this. They begin to emit a common frequency. They cluster, they form collectives, until eventually they reach a critical mass. They can no longer be opposed. In time, the old yields to the new, and something beautiful emerges. So know this, the future is not foreclosed. Alternative worlds are possible. A world where hope matters more than despair. A world where care matters more than profit. A world where solidarity matters more than self-interest. Change can happen, and change is coming. Are you in?
Absolutely, I'm in, and this is the golden rule. Treat others and the planet as you wish to be treated. That has been around since humanity, and all records that we have, that is the golden rule that we practice moving into the future. But what I can tell you, in the international organizations around the world, in the movements around the world, at events I speak in, I'm seeing all sorts of interesting movements emerge. Just at the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, I think is how you say it, the president of the European Commission, she came out and for 1 hour during this Beyond Growth conference that they had at the EU Parliament, spoke specifically about changing our economic models, changing our systems, about the new Green Deal, and had the world's thought leaders come around and speak about the models that we need to move into in the future. Then 1 week later, we had Change Now in Paris. Same thing, thought leaders coming around the world speaking about the change that we want to see in the future. What does a world that works for everyone look like in the future? And who are the thought leaders that are thinking about this to guide us into the future? So as you know the answer for yourself, it's important to know what others in leadership positions are doing around the world, so that if it's not the way or the future that you envision for us or for yourself, that you make sure your voice is heard, that you take part of that journey. And as we kind of set out on the last part of my talk is we really want to go to the Symbiocene. We're currently in the Anthropocene and everybody's shaking their finger and saying how bad humans are impacting on our environment and our planet. It's a very anthropocenic vocabulary and terminology. But we want to get out of that terminology and we want to have new words for a new world, and that is so that we can transition from the Anthropocene to the Symbiocene. Now, you've probably seen this image before, and as an environmentalist, an economist, I show this all the time, but I think most people misunderstand what we're seeing here. What is this image? How do we have this image of our planet? This is, by the way, the second catalog image of our planet. It's called the Blue Marble. It was taken in 1972. Anybody want to shout out, how do we have this image? What is this image? It's not a trick question, but it is sheer innovation. It's not meant to show us that we're all on spaceship Earth, that there's no borders or divisions or individuals. This is sheer innovation. This is technology. Had we not gone to the moon, had we not gone to outer space, we wouldn't even have this image. We didn't even have the computing power, the technology when we decided to go to the moon and by accident look back at our planet. Every single second of the day, we have thousands of satellite images showing us this innovation about the heart blood, the pulse, the life of our planet, where we're going, what's happening, so that we can react and feel that we are on a living planet, so that we know that we need to protect it for our future. What kind of innovations and technologies can we use to help us get to that beautiful, resilient, regenerative, desirable future? So there's, like I said, thousands of different satellites looking back at our Earth, and it is a global Earth observation system of systems. But I want to talk to you about another innovator or pioneer or innovation, and that is Dr. Bertrand Piccard. He's a good friend of mine. You might have known him, you might have heard about him. If not, I'm going to tell you. He is the first man to fly around the world on the Solar Impulse glider airplane on renewable energy, solar energy, all the way around the world, broke records. This is us at one of the many times we see each other over the year at the climate conference, COP24 in Katowice, Poland. And I went up to him and I said, "Congratulations for flying around the world. How was it? Tell me about it." And he said, "Mark, you won't believe it. Have you ever been in an electric vehicle?" And I said, "Yeah, matter of fact, I was just at H Farm in Italy and I drove this nice electric vehicle. And it was really weird because I got in and I pushed the button and I thought, oh, it's broken, nothing. I didn't hear anything. And then it was already on, and then I stepped on the accelerator or on the pedal, and it took off. And I said it was surreal because it was silent. I couldn't hear anything, couldn't hear the noise outside. He said, "That's nothing. That's great. Congratulations for you, Mark." But guess what? I'm up in Solar Impulse airplane. It's the world's lightest glider, 1,000 times lighter than the competition glider. Up, and the way that works is we turn on the propellers and we just go up as high as we can, and we glide up into our atmosphere. And I have to have an oxygen because the air is so thin up there. And then when I get as high as I possibly can, I turn off the engines and I do a gradual glide down as the solar panels on the plane charge. He said, I'd just gotten to the very top and I turned off the propellers and I was doing a gradual glide down, and I looked off to my left at all the solar panels on the wings and the instrumentation and the beauty. And I looked back, I looked at the instrument panel. I'm sitting on a toilet, I'm in this kind of a spacesuit. There's all these gadgets around me, and I look off at the other wing and all the solar panels. He said, I'm in the future. I'm a spaceman. I'm from the future. And then he said about another 15 minutes had gone by. I'd done all my checks. I'm in this silence. And he looked around again and he said, no, solar panels have existed for decades. He said, flying in gliders have existed for a long time. All this technology has existed for quite some time. I'm just the first to put it all together and make it work in a renewable way. He said, I'm living in the now. Everybody else is living in the past. We did not leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We left the Stone Age because there's better ways to not hurt humanity or our environment or our planet. I still plan on flying, but I'd like to do it without damage to the world. And this is a private conversation that I'm now making public between Bertrand Piccard speaking to Ban Ki-moon at the signing of the Paris Agreement and the ratification of the Sustainable Development Goals. Listen in here and tell me if you can feel this momentous event.
Hello, Solar Pulse. Hello, Captain Piccard. Where are you now flying?
I speak to you from the cockpit of Solar Impulse in the middle of the Pacific, flying on solar power, only, no fuel. You know, Mr. Secretary General, what you are doing today in New York, signing the Paris Climate Agreement, is more than protecting the environment. It is the launch of the clean technology revolution. But there is so much resistance everywhere. So be pioneers, be adventurers, be explorers of the solutions of today. This is how we can make a better world. Don't let the resistance take over, because we have the solutions. And if an airplane can come, like Solar Impulse, can fly day and night without fuel, the world, of course, can be much cleaner.
I am inspired by your pioneering spirit, and while you are making history, we have also made the history today. More than 175 countries signed the climate change agreement. And I'm thank you for your leadership and inspiration. And I thank you very much. All the best to you. Bon voyage.
This was a historical moment in human history. If you didn't realize this, it's the first time in human history that 197 countries have come together ever and agreed upon a roadmap, a plan of action, targets and indicators to keep us safely at 1.5 degrees of warming and to get us there. It's never occurred. If you know about politicians and delegates and countries, it's hard enough for two of them to decide where they're going to eat lunch, let alone 197 decide on a people, planet, insurance plan for our planet. They were presented to us in the wrong way, and that's why I wrote the Sustainable Development Goal Manifesto for the United Nations. And I'm not going to read it to you now because we need to kind of move forward, but I want you to know it's a vision to keep us at what the world will look like in December 2030, because people ask, who are the goals for? Are they for politicians, cities, and countries? Well, they're for us. They're for you and me. They're not for anybody else. They're to make sure that we have the basic needs and rights for humanity so that we can have a wonderful life. They're just the basic needs. And this bottom layer, the biosphere, that's how we produce everything. That's how we get materials to produce cars, computers. That's how we grow our food. And without that, we can't stimulate society. We can't grow our economy. And we definitely can't have partnerships for the goals. I don't know about you, but it looks very similar to this model, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What's the bottom two layers of that pyramid? This is just for our needs, yours and my needs. Well, guess what? Looks a lot like this one, right? So who are they for? They're for us. forget about companies, countries, and organizations. If they implement it, then guess what? They're going to have lots of success. They're going to help humanity transition. But most people don't know that there's 6 major transformations needed, not only to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, but to get out of that Anthropocene that I was telling you about into the Symbiocene. The one that organizations and companies talk about is number 6, the digital revolution, the digital transformation. But did you know that there's 5 others? The first one's actually education. So it's important to know that we have 6 major transformations, and we've had 6 major transformations even before the Sustainable Development Goals. Matter of fact, 15 years before the Sustainable Development Goals even came about, we've known this is what we need to get out of the Anthropocene. And all of them are tied to the SDGs. So another thing that people don't know about Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, there's a dollar amount. $90 trillion is needed to reach them by December 2030. Well, that's an astronomical, crazy number. That's about $6 trillion every single year had we had started in 2015. But the reason I tell you about that astronomical number, it's not confusing at all. The reason we know that is business as usual, development, regular development, building things just how we've always built them, building buildings how we've always built them before. That's called development. It's a high carbon scenario, how we've always done it, business as usual. That will cost us $89 trillion by December 2030, and we know that for a fact. And actually, it's been bumped up because of the Brexit, because of the Ukraine war, because of the pandemic. That number has even gone up because now we've had more stimulations and other things affect normal development. But to do sustainable development in a much more sustainable way that gives us a much longer term outcome, more resilience, and a better world, it's only about $16 trillion more with a much better outcome. Now people say, we'll never get that money. That's unbelievable. This is COP26 in Glasgow. The first week on Thursday, Mark Carney and Rishi Sunak already committed $130 trillion, and that was 2 years ago towards sustainable finance and the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, to make sure we can achieve that. So the money's there as well. And those organizations that have done that and already changed their business model, they're on the right side of history. Now, there's so many other things like the July 12, 2021, the EU taxonomy, ESG, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, the CSRD, and the 6 pillars. That was all paved by the Sustainable Development Goals, moving in that direction. And then this is the Corporate Social Sustainability Reporting Directive that came out. All organizations with 250 or more employees are required to do this reporting. Why is that important? Well, in the EU alone, that's over 65,000 companies that are being required. But if you heard last year, Deutsche Bank was raided because companies were reporting wrong on their ESG. So the very next day after they were raided, Commerzbank, Deutsche Bank, Berenberger, Julius Baer, and many other banks went to their clients and said, we can no longer be your bank. You're hurting our environment. You're not complying with ESG. So that model is moving forward into the future. Now that term Symbiocene comes from Glenn Albrecht, Earth Emotions. And he said, we need new words for a new world. But here's the key factor I want you to know. There's another book, and it was written by Lynn Margulis, or translated by Lynn Margulis, that was originally published in Russian. And that says, symbiosis as a source of evolutionary innovation. And matter of fact, it is the fastest growing super exponential quantum tunneling innovation our world has ever seen. And it has to do with you and me and that term symbiosis. Like I said, it came from Lynn Margulis, but there's a term I want you to be clear with. In all living systems, biology, ecology, environment, all living systems, 1 + 1, and I have here rarely equals 2, but actually it's never, ever, ever, ever will equal 2. It's what we call a super exponential, and it actually goes into quantum tunneling. So if we apply that into our organizations, we apply that into our life, guess what? Any capitalistic model, any extractive model, any bad business model or economy that we don't like, even though we don't want to compete against it, we will blow it out of the water. And that's the models that we're seeing emerging into the future. That comes not just from me, it comes from Jeffrey West in his book Scale. It comes from the Stern Review. Did over 200,000 companies that had applied ESG and sustainability in their model. Guess what? They all outperformed the competition. And so that's why I'm seeing economic models emerge, ecological economic models emerge in our world. Just in the last 2 years, there's been over 20 books written on ecological economic models. The Club of Rome came out with a new one called Earth for All, an ecological model that envelops 3 models: the donut economy, planetary boundaries, and the Club of Rome original systems dynamic world model 3 that has been revamped. They're putting those 3 ideas together to come out with a new model. If I were to ask you guys a question, how many ecological economic models can you name? I know for a fact you can name 5. But does anybody want to shout 1 or 2 out real quick as I wrap up this talk? Donut economics, circular economy, shared economics, platform economics, well-being economics. And those come from the second father of ecological economics, Herman Daly. And these are the traditional economic models that we live in our life, but here's all the ecological economic models that are in our world. So people all over the world are coming up with new models because they're not happy with the way we've been going. So I want you to know there's other options and things available out there that we need to go into this systems dynamic modeling, this regenerative platform systems dynamic models for business to get into this symbiocene. And after the Sustainable Development Goals comes the Resilient Development Goals. Most people think that when the SDGs end in 2030, there will be nothing else. So I want you to know, instead of debating or talking about that, it's time to move forward in that. I'm going to skip some slides to end this talk. In our world, there has been more than 32 civilization framework models. 32 civilizations. What I mean by that, early antiquity, Mesopotamia, Incas, Aztecs, Mayas, the Greeks, the Romans, on and on, more than 32. Guess what? All of them collapsed because they were running the exact same model. What is that model? It's a hierarchy model. It doesn't matter which of those 32 examples you look at, they were all running a hierarchy model. With one person at the top, king, ruler, president, or emperor at the top, and on the bottom, peasants, slaves, and laborers. And those models always, no matter what, will collapse because it's a division of class. It's just like how we see by medical students or by birds who sit on the pole. It doesn't work. We need to go out of our ego, think into the eco, and then we end the journey in seva. Seva is an old Sanskrit word that means regeneration, selfless service to life, that we are in harmony and working together on a symbiotic planet. It's a journey that we're all in, but I can definitely see that MHP is already in the eco and just one step closer to that seva and the things that you're doing. because you never change things by fighting the existing system. In order to change something, build a new model that makes the old one obsolete. Like Bertrand Piccard said, we didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. Thank you all very much.